Good evening, everyone. Good evening to the organizers and participants of this conference. I congratulate the John Dewey School for Children, JDSC, and the Partnerships for Sustainability Education for organizing this important conference at this very opportune time. Thank you for inviting me to be with you here. I consider it a privilege and a unique opportunity to share insights and interact with educators, professors, and teachers all over the country and possibly in other parts of the world. I believe that this theme, calling for unity among schools to work towards sustainability and education in the midst of COVID-19, is such a noteworthy initiative. So I have questions. What insights have we gleaned so far from the COVID-19 experience? As educators, have we reflected on our experiences? And have we identified our key insights? I don't expect an immediate answer at this time. I just want you to think about it, and hopefully from the questions that you might pose in a while, we can interact and dwell on some of these concerns. What I would like to share with you today are some of the initiatives and personal insights that I have in relation to my advocacy and legal empowerment work as part of a public interest environmental law group, that is the Environmental Legal Assistance Center. While I have been teaching in the Palawan State University College of Law for more than 25 years, I am doing this part-time and on weekends. So I spend a greater part of my time doing legal empowerment and advocacy work, which involve a lot of education work, and this takes place almost every day. I provide legal advice to citizens, mostly poor, vulnerable, and marginalized groups. We also work with government in a lot of the concerns, ranging from forest to coastal to infrastructure projects and even to good governance. So I conduct, together with my colleagues, we conduct awareness seminars and capability building activities. We do legal clinicking and mentoring activities to community paralegals, to civil society leaders, and to students. So almost every month, there are invitations from various schools all over the country to invite us to talk about environment, about the role of youth, about climate change, and many others. And in addition, I do handle science and law interns every year. So in the slides that I would like to share with you, I'd like to focus on the insights. Okay, so can you see the slides? Okay. So I hope it's clear. So these are some of the insights I'd like to share. I'm not, unlike Rochelle and the other speakers who are full-time educators, deans, and principals. I'm more of a civil society advocate and teaching part-time. But teaching formally and informally, modesty aside, has been part of my life. Okay. So some of the insights that I'd like to share with you is that when we actually talk in school or even outside of school about any topic, whether it's climate change and environment or governance or education, we should always have a sense of history because we do analyze problems and work on solutions. And the historical perspective is very important. Example, and pardon me that my sharing would be dominantly related to environment and also land and natural resource use, because that's the area of work that I have been in for 30 years. So when you talk of historical perspectives, we should take stock of land and natural resource use issues, which have been rooted in our colonial past. So we view this from historical perspective. We know for a fact that we have been under Spain for more than 300 years and the United States for almost half a century. And a resource-rich country like the Philippines, we have been subjected to a lot of extraction and exploitation. And therefore, it would be understandable for students for young people and teachers and educators to glean insights from reading history, that these policies were characterized by continuous extraction and exploitation. And there you can understand why the mining companies are, come from abroad, and then they were set up later, in partnership with Filipino corporations. Logging as well. We brought a lot of the wood to Japan and other countries. And then we had corporate and agribusiness ventures. So you convert food farm lands into export monocrop plantations. Okay, so example here, when you look at Sierra Madre, which is a protected area, before and now, you will be sad because you've seen years and decades of destruction there. I'm showing you in a while, all these series of photos, just to remind ourselves that when students see this, when teachers actually bring this into the classroom, it gives a living illustration, okay, of the experience that the Philippines has been subjected to. Bulacan's watershed, okay, this is a critical watershed, but illegal logging and charcoal making are problems there. And you take a look at mining here, okay? And I'm sorry. I hope you can see this. And then this is the flooding in Isabela, Cagayan, caused by massive illegal logging. So logging through the years, it has continued, and therefore there will be impact on our lives. Okay. And then this is in Manicani province in Eastern Samar. There's mining still there. There's actually a division in the community because some are saying that they survive based on the income from mining, but the destruction of the rivers, of their forests are continuing. In Mindanao, we have seen how lands have been opened to big corporations. And you have mega dams there, logging, and also mining. And then large plantations there are drivers of deforestation. And they have also caused the displacement of indigenous peoples and local communities. I think there are photos here like the oil palm plantations. And mind you, this is a troubling development that we have actually allowed, and we are open to opening up more than 50,000 hectares of land, including forest land, to oil palm plantations in Mindanao and Palawan. So this is something that we need to be vigilant about. You buy in the restaurants palm oil, right? But we do not know the history, how oil palm plantations have actually caused the destruction in Malaysia, how orangutans have been threatened in these beautiful forests, okay, in Southeast Asia. And then this is Claver, Surigao del Norte, okay, from Atong Araulio, how the landscape has been ravaged. So then and also natural disasters, which have caused these things. Then you will try to understand, and students are very good at this, and say, what has happened? These are big wood. What has the government done? Are people allowing this? Why? Why and why and why? And I've responded to a lot of questions in my talks with college students, even high school students, okay? Because they are worried about their future, because they know that they need forest to be able to survive. Oxygen, and food security as well, because you need watersheds, water for your farmlands. Okay. History also, climate change. We know that with the Industrial Revolution, humankind has invented a lot of technology, and then thereafter, fossil fuel operations, okay, and there's an increase in the number of coal companies all over the world. But there is a study relatively recently, this is quite recent, by Dr. Richard Heady. He was a witness in our carbon majors case. And it was interesting to see that when they did their study this is almost a decade, and it has been updated, that about more than 20% of the greenhouse gas emissions in the world are attributable to about 50 investor-owned companies. Okay, and they are called the carbon majors. Okay, now, if you relate climate change to pandemics, because it's important now since we are confronted with COVID-19, and we hear a lot of news, right and left, whether there's a conspiracy theory that it was created, but mind you, the scientists and the doctors have been able to provide us with a lot of information, including scientists, and this I read this from the Harvard Chan School of Public Health, that many of the root causes of the climate change also increase the risk of pandemics. And when you talk about deforestation, how you ravaged our land because you allowed infrastructure projects without complying with the law, mining activities, and illegal logging, this has resulted to habitat loss and loss of biodiversity. So definitely flora and fauna will be adversely affected. And when you destroy the habitat of flora and fauna, it forces the animals and the plants, particularly animals, to migrate and potentially contact other animals or people and share germs. Okay. So it's also good to point out that large livestock farms, okay, because this is being promoted worldwide, they can also serve as a source of spillover of infections from animals. Okay, so that is also important to underscore. And I met some lawyers and advocates from Brazil, and they were concerned that large tracts of forest land and productive agricultural land have to be converted for cattle farms because of the growing demand for beef or for cattle. And pork. So the less demand for animal meat and hopefully encouraging more sustainable animal husbandry could decrease emerging infectious diseases. So this can not only lower greenhouse gas emissions, but it can also decrease the risk of emerging infectious diseases. So this is very helpful. Now, other researches, when we look at, again, history, researches on air pollution and virus transmissions. Okay, these are also important to take note because in the Harvard University, they did a study that they found that a small increase in long-term exposure to particulate matter leads to a large increase in COVID-19 death rate. So this is in 2019. So very helpful when you look at this. And then also other researches on the association between respiratory infection and air pollution in shaping air quality policy and economic change. It's important that when you research, when you do studies, okay, evidence-based efforts, and then a lot of science, the doctors, the scientists will determine why pneumonia will be common and why there's an increase in influenza. So these are things that are very helpful for us, for teachers, for students, because especially now, when we're confronted with COVID-19, we are deluged. Okay, we're overwhelmed sometimes with a lot of information, and we have to be careful on, being drawn to certain theories which are not also supported. But we do read about them. Now, airborne transmission, further, according to the studies, they may have played a role in the spread of the 2015 highly pathogenic avian influenza in the United States. So I'm just highlighting this to show that in our pursuit of knowledge, the conduct of researches play a vital role, and we are enlightened by this. Okay, for pursuing sustainability in education, especially in the post-COVID-19, we're not yet sure whether it's post-COVID-19. We do a lot of researches and studies, and we will be informed by all of these. Okay, SARS pandemic, etc. Now, my second insight is indigenous knowledge systems and practices, or what is globally called as IKSP. It's important to appreciate, recognize, and promote them. Many of our indigenous peoples are misunderstood. Example, the Bajau from Mindanao. Okay, people, I think you've seen them, no, in the boats, and that's their culture. They migrate. They're also here in Palawan. They're in the Visayas, but they do have a distinctive culture when you go to Mindanao. Okay, the way they fish, the way they lessen their impact on the environment. And I have come across an interesting unpublished thesis of a teacher from the Cordilleras, Miss Silene Kinomis. Okay, she defined IKSP as local knowledge developed over centuries of experimentation by their ancestors. And these are passed orally from generation to generation because not all of these are documented. So it's a perfect foundation to a sustainable development, past, present, and the future. Okay, sorry. In the Indigenous Peoples' Rights Act, okay, pardon the legalese, it's important to highlight that as Filipinos, we do have a lot of laws, the Constitution, other laws, not only the Indigenous Peoples' Rights Act, but other environmental laws. Example, even the Protected Areas laws recognize indigenous knowledge and ancestral domains. And their rights are protected, okay? It is recognized by law that these practices, knowledge systems are supposed to be valued. These are sources of knowledge as to how you can save water, okay? How you can do family planning. The Batak tribe, they only have few kids, okay? It's their own natural way. How you can develop a lot of rice seedlings. They do have ceremonies on how to harvest honey, okay? And therefore, herbal medicine, they abound. Other genetic resources. So that is recognized by law, nationally and also internationally. Because they are recognized, it's important to note that there's an initiative now happening all over the country, and hopefully Congress can pass a law recognizing indigenous community conserved areas. It's not just simply looking at forest as a source of life, okay, food, herbal medicine, but it's also recognizing that because of IKSP, they have been able to maintain our rich biodiversity and forest. So this is recognized, and hopefully if it passes Congress, then there can be more programs that will support IKSP and the indigenous peoples. Now, I'm showing this slide because there was a research on the carbon stock of the forest inside ancestral domains. Actually, Balabac, Palawan was included in the study. There were 10 studies, 10 ECA pilot sites, and they underscored that carbon, approximately 7 million, okay, actually this is gigatons of carbon, are found within these ancestral domains. So if these are maintained, that those carbon sinks, you can just imagine how clean the air would be, okay? And how much trees, biodiversity, food, medicine, okay, and everything we can provide to future generations. Okay. The study of Miss Silene Braille Donato Kinomis, I'm showing this, I'm borrowing her slides. Okay, actually this is in the internet, so it's something public. She showed their rice terraces, because she comes from the Cordilleras, so she's proud about this. And as a teacher, her challenge, her plan was to integrate indigenous knowledge systems and practices into the subjects, because there is value in chemistry, zoology, medicine, and biology. Okay. So these were things that she wanted to look into, but she identified certain problems, okay? Certain problems as regards to integrating IKSP into the subjects. And I'm sure teachers and educators would also face the same problems because the sources in the library may be limited. The students may not be interested. They cannot relate to it. So the challenge is, how do you encourage? How do you enlighten students and possibly inspire them that this is an important part of our heritage and our culture? So this is a nice slide from her saying that these are the challenges and how can I proceed to make sure that I can encourage more. I can encourage more work in this area. So she identified the problems encountered by teachers, and there appears to be an unclear mandate on how to integrate or incorporate IKSPs in the subject. Okay, so the willingness, can be erratic because definitely if you have an imprimatur from the school, from the Department of Education, from the government, then that would be a lot more easier. So how do you motivate teachers and students to do that? Okay, these are some of the things I actually identified in her study. Okay, and she said that there are ways to promote and underscore the value of IKSP. Example, you can integrate in science the use of herbal botanical plants and insects as medicine. And then in biology, how to care for mother and child. Okay, for chemistry, wines and beverages, how they are prepared, and musical instruments. Okay, so these are some of her conclusions, but I would like to underscore her recommendations. And these are very useful for us, that this effort may be a good start, but she recommends that teachers should continue to add more IKSP information during science discussions, especially for indigenous peoples, okay, you are studying. And then we have to understand, again, history, science, and the initiatives in relation to indigenous knowledge systems and practices. So we are encouraged to be more resourceful and also responsible. And then how do you take into account the interests of the students? It's not just informing them about it, but perhaps you can encourage mini researches, or probably including this in the curriculum, or doing more seminars and trainings on it, or doing field trips. Okay, in law school, I'll share in a while that I do those things, except that we have had lockdowns under COVID. Okay, this is also another important insight. And because I'm teaching law and also doing a lot of legal empowerment activities, I always stress that while we have many laws and there are many programs, they're only as good as their implementation. So it's not enough that you do have a law and yet you do not have resources to implement it. You do not have warm bodies to actually enforce it, to monitor it, and to make sure that people who violate are held liable, and people in government who are mandated and fail to implement it are held accountable. Okay, this is the Philippine Development Plan of the Duterte administration. I read it's quite voluminous. And I want to show this slide to emphasize the fact that they are good theoretically. It's well thought of. It's in Tagalog. Okay, they're translated into Tagalog. Example, enhancing the social fabric is called malasakit. Reducing inequality is pagbabago. Okay, increasing growth, okay, is patuloy na pagunlad. And therefore, there are strategies as as these are implemented. And in the process, the government seeks to regain the people's trust in public institutions and also cultivate trust in fellow Filipinos. And then the question is, how much funds are being allocated to make sure that these are enforced? Okay. Now, the Philippine Development Plan also identified certain strategies. Example, institutionalizing and intensifying heritage conservation plans and programs. So are there a lot of support systems and mechanisms to support, example, the National Museum, the NCCA, okay, and historical institutes? how are the knowledge development centers? How many schools for living traditions have been built in Mindanao, in the Visayas, in Palawan, in Luzon? We need to actually promote this. This need to be encouraged. Are there teachers who have been trained to be part of the SLTs? And then the civic spaces for dialogue, so that people understand if this is if the shifting agriculture, which is actually somehow misunderstood in some areas, why can they promote rich rice, okay? Rich rice seedlings, example. Why is that? So we can only know about these things if the indigenous peoples themselves tell their stories and share their own experiences. Okay. There is a law, okay, so that's a Philippine Development Plan. I'm just identifying certain examples because there are many. There's a National Environmental Awareness and Education Act. All of us are covered here because it says from nursery all the way to PhD, even test the schools, informal learning institutions are covered. So we are actually required to promote awareness through environmental education, and it encompasses a lot of concepts and principles. So then it's not just national laws, but also the state of international practices as well, and policies. The threats to environmental degradation, what can we do, etc. Okay. So I'm underscoring that because it's easy to pass a law. I'm not saying it's easy. It takes actually years. It took like more than 12 years to pass the Indigenous Peoples' Rights Act. And it took a long time to have it implemented. And until now, there's not enough funding to be able to implement it and to survey the Certificate of Assessal Domain Title Areas, or CADT claims. Now, third, processes are important. Teachers know this. You do research, you have modules, there's a curriculum, you organize this, you have materials. They are very important. There's a science to that. And when we deal with bigger problems, example, corruption in a particular agency. Once upon a time, there were problems about corruption in the education department years ago. Remember, textbooks? There are no quick fixes, actually. And when you deal with governance-related challenges, you have to make sure that processes are in place. And when we articulate this to the students, we should explain it in the simplest way, not only through laws, but through actual stories and experiences. And teachers are good at this. My example here is a fairly recent project in Northern Palawan, where there's a plan by the government to build a 4.2 billion bridge, okay, which people there are not aware of. And there were no permits, no public consultations. The Tagbanuas were questioning the project. There was no free and informed consent. Okay, so violations of all the key laws. And then the scientists like Dr. Miguel Fortes explained the likely environmental impacts of the project. And he was saying that when you do a cost-benefit analysis and you give value to science, you will realize that the contribution of the coral reefs, the mangroves, the seagrass beds, the shipwrecks, which are part of cultural heritage, are so substantial compared to probably who would benefit from the bridge, because there's no study, there's no feasibility study yet. And therefore, it is important that when we look at the processes, we are exposed and we get to understand the bigger picture, that somehow one action is connected to another. And I think when we teach our students, we take care in explaining that when, example, the water cycle, right? When you explain that, that I admire teachers how they can simplify these concepts. And this may be complicated, but for, I think this can be simplified through specific experiences on the ground. Look at the human well-being. You see, the ecosystems, whether forest, marine, they may be complicated, but then we realize that when we protect them and when we lose them, it actually affects our well-being, because the value of biodiversity from these ecosystems actually provide us with, they give us aesthetic value, spiritual value, recreational value, not only food. So eventually, human well-being is a positive, is a positive result here. And he talked about legal and social imperatives that should also be linked to the whole process. So processes may have varying levels, but this is one example where it can be complicated, but it has to be stressed. And it has to be observed. Okay, next, I do not know how many minutes I have. Promotion of good values and principles must be sustained. I remember this. My time, we call it good manners and right conduct, and they should be sustained. Even in law school, I teach legal ethics, not this semester, but for a long time. And I'm telling my students, good manners and right conduct since elementary. Honesty is the best policy. So when you study legal ethics, you cannot lie, okay? Because your license is at stake for lawyers. So I was just saying that's simple, but it gets complicated and the responsibility gets doubled or trebled as you go through higher level of education. A public office is a public trust. It's in the Constitution. It's worded that way. So if you run for public office as a barangay official, as a president, as a governor, you are responsible. You cannot say, I cannot do that. And then this I like for the environment. If you pollute, you're liable. And right now, it's in the law, polluter pays principle. So you cannot escape that. It's already in the law. So these are important principles I learned when I was still in elementary. And it's very important that we take stock of them, we value them, we stress them. Precautionary principle may be complicated. But you see, I learned from my mother, it's better to err on the side of caution, okay, than on the side of haste. So it's better to be cautious. So when you apply that in decision making, if you do not have absolute scientific certainty that this particular bridge project can make sure that the environment will be protected, then you should take action and decide that you should not allow it or you should conduct studies. So that's a precautionary principle. You can also use this for gender, for women. If a particular program does not ensure that gender concerns are addressed, then you should not proceed. You should not proceed. But it also provides that if you're not sure, you should also take action to protect it. Example, genetically modified organisms, okay? GMOs in the States, in Europe, they invoke precautionary principle so that certain GMO products are not promoted. So you see, it gets complicated, but that's an important principle. Okay, perspectives. This I love because students memorize Panatang Makabayan, right? This is the land of my birth. In the Ibig Philippines. Until now, modesty aside, I memorized that. Okay, and when we know that we are a steward of our natural resources, of the environment, and we are responsible not only for ourselves, but for the future generations, then we understand now that stewardship is not only biblical, it's also a moral responsibility and also legal. Okay, and that's the essence of public trust doctrine. The state now, as a trustee, has a responsibility, and they have a responsibility to protect our rights. Okay, so it's a very good perspective. Now, part of what we do, part of the values that we promote is encouraging students to go out, okay, of the classroom and integrate. So I do have law interns here and even young lawyers who we mobilized and participate in meetings with indigenous peoples as part of their internships, as part of the legal clinic. And they do and they see how important it is to translate the law into Tagalog and to simplify it in concepts that local communities like farmers, okay, indigenous peoples and fisher folks can relate with. So it's important that you go out. And I think field trips are important, and you miss a lot of that now. I really miss that. I cannot bring my students to the underground river anymore, to the mangroves, to the Kakatu sanctuary for more than a year. But this is the methodology I use in law school teaching natural resources, environmental law. Field trips are part of it. Role plays are important. You give them a case, they can debate. One acts as the government, another acts as a community, another acts as a civil society advocate, a media, or a lawyer. So it's very interesting. And then seminars, they're assigned topics, a specific law, or a webinar on climate change, and then they report. Okay, they're graded for that. And then internships. So these are very handy and important so that concepts in school are given life. Okay. Another insight, and I'm about to end. Citizens initiatives. Young people all over the world, all over the country, have done a lot. And if only we can document them, not only through videos, but in books, stories, I think the future generations would value that. And young people can actually write about that. And among others, there is now a call for promoting monitoring by citizens. Okay. Now you might ask, but college students or high school students may have difficulty. I think in their own way, they can probably take photos, report it to their teachers, or come across a bad incident and talk about it. So they can report incidents, not necessarily to the police, but to their teachers, and they talk about it. And they can document these crimes. I remember 15, 16, 17 students reporting to me that they were troubled and they were disturbed by the fact that garbage and waste was not segregated in their neighborhood. And I was really so happy that, there were, young people who reported that. And then they can even support passage of ordinances. When we think of the initiative of Greta Thunberg and other young people in other parts of the world, pushing for good governance, pushing for accountability, then we realize that young voices are very, very important and can shape the narrative on good governance and climate change. And of course, voting wisely. Okay, so there are many things that are being done all over the country. I'm showing this to you, beautiful photos of Puerto Princesa, the underground river. I brought my students here, okay? Although they're from here, they always value the interaction, communing with nature, okay? And then supporting efforts of indigenous communities. This is Quin Island. This is part of an ancestral territory. Other efforts are, getting support from the private sector. That's good. Multi-sectoral enforcement activities, food patrols, indigenous peoples do that. Women, fisher folk, they are part of multi-sectoral enforcement efforts. And then they can pass ordinances. So if you do have sangguniang kabataan in every level of the local government unit, young people can actually write them, petition them, and have dialogues with them. Okay. Mobilization, you see this everywhere in social media. Okay. And this is something that you have to also manage because not all are actually accurate. Okay. So promoting good governance and community pantry. You know why I highlight this? Because they were misunderstood. And right now, it's also being done in Palawan, where I live and where I teach, where I work. And here, because it's happening at the micro level, like the experience of Chris Zoleta, the one here with the eyeglasses. Okay, she wants to share that it's very heartwarming, okay, and inspiring for her that her own neighbors came forward and donated. without, without her invitation. So bayanihan is very much alive, and we should sustain that. Okay, a few more efforts on planting. When you do reforestation or rainforestation, you have to consciously make sure that it is endemic species. So then you can adopt seedlings, and an equally important effort is maintaining this. So for students, when you encourage them to plant, it's not just like leaving the plastic there, because even plastics have bad consequences. So make sure that they're removed, okay, ideally, or probably use paper instead for the seedlings, and then plan on how to do the maintenance work, because some of this may die, okay? Like a forest fire a few years ago in the reforested area. Okay, Save the Philippine Seas, they organize a lot of activities with young people to raise awareness about marine life. So these are inspiring. Greenpeace, they do have a lot of campaigns. And I'm proud to be part of a legal pool where we initiated an administrative inquiry to look into the human rights impacts of climate change based on the study that I mentioned a while ago of Dr. Richard Heedy, okay, the carbon majors. So these are things that people slowly understand, and then they can link the right to life, the right to livelihood, the right to culture, all of that, even the right to adjust transition for laborers. Because the jeepney drivers, the laborers working in certain companies, they cannot just be displaced immediately. So that can be part of a dialogue, okay, part of a process. And when you talk about renewable energy, okay, it's not that simple, because even wind energy can, the wind vanes can have an impact on birds. Solar energy occupies a lot of space, and even hydro can also cut trees. But you actually weigh, you have studies, there's cost benefit studies, and then valuation. And that is an important process. So it's not a perfect situation. So at the end of the day, there are ethical questions that we need to ponder on. And it's weighing profitability versus sustainability. What would be more effective or more appropriate to the Philippines, or to a small area like Quezon City, or to Puerto Princesa City? What would be a mechanism that would be appropriate? Okay, so this requires processes, a good understanding, and research. So just my few more slides before I end. I think students and young people must be encouraged. And these are some of the roles. There are many more. They are dynamic, energetic. Some are, inquisitive, but they also have to be managed. They have to look into their well-being as well, because they're studying and they're young, and their emotional quotient also is something that they have to be aware of. So these are things that I have seen young people are capable of doing in school, outside of school, like building networks. They're very good at that. My own experience is the One Palawan campaign recently. Whoever expected that the no vote, in the plebiscite in Palawan to actually oppose the proposed division of Palawan will win? Young people played a critical role there. And I was really inspired by them, when we go around talking students and young people. So it is possible. And my last two more slides, okay. The advocacy for accountability for young people is actually all over the world. Besides the efforts of Greta Thunberg, the Juliana case in New York, there are other youth groups around the world challenging governments in action on climate, because they want to demand a fair, good, okay, future for them, okay, a safe future for them. And so in Canada, there are groups challenging their government to implement their targets and their laws. Okay, so I think that's my last slide. And I hope with these few insights, and given the limited time, I've been able to share with you, the efforts for more than 2 decades, learning from the young people and doing my small share of strengthening education work and ensuring that sustainability premises and concepts are alive, are very much alive. Mabuhay po kayong lahat. Thank you for listening.